If you were president, would you declassify, you can answer yes or no to these. Would you declassify the 9/11 files?
Yeah.
Would you declassify JFK files?
Yeah. I did a lot of it.
Would you declassify the Epstein files?
Yeah, I would.
All right.
I guess I would. I think that less so because, you don't know it. You don't want to affect people's lives if it's phony stuff in there because there's a lot of phony stuff with that whole world. But I think I would, or at least
Do you think that would restore trust? Help restore trust?
Yeah, I don't know about Epstein so much as I do the others.
Why do you guys always invite me to the long episodes? Why can't we just do a fun 10-minute thing?
Right. Why can't you come on for, like, the White Chicks episode?
Yeah. Stuff I actually know about,
Sorry, Isaac. Hey, everybody, and welcome to Remember Shuffle. My name is Ben. With me, as always, is my co-host, Giordano.
Hi, it's me, Giordano from Remember Shuffle. What I want to know is, what did Ben know about 9/11? And where was he?
Nice. Today, we are joined by, I believe, 3-time returning Remember Shuffle guest, Isaac Eger.
Yo.
How's it going?
Glad to be here. Glad to be in person. John's got a pretty sweet spot, man. I'll tell you.
Thank you. Yeah, Isaac's sitting on the floor. He told me he's a floor-sitting guy.
All right, that was private information.
He said it's something he learned from the Dalai Lama. Yeah.
Amongst other things.
I heard today on your podcast that you might have a brain worm from eating raw chicken.
I don't think it was from the chicken. I think it was from the octopus, the raw octopus. But yeah, I did a raw meat mukbang to entertain the stupid masses. And I got really sick from it. And I just haven't felt like the same person ever since. But I have been complaining, like I said on my show, that I wanted a co-host. And I think I finally got one. So
the worm.
Yeah.
Dude, that's sick. You're just like RFK Jr.
I wish, dude. That guy's got adventures, man.
He's going on so many escapades at all times.
Yeah, it's really like a Seinfeld bit of hitting the bear and then putting it.
Have you ever wanted a President Kramer? This is the best. This is the best we got.
Oh no, he would be George. That's some George shit right there.
All right, getting down to business. We will be talking about the 9/11 truth movement in movies today. Here, Remember Shuffle, we love to put the cart before the horse, right? So we did an episode on the Tea Party before we did the economic crisis. We did an episode on Pat Tillman before we did an episode on the Iraq War, although there's one in the works. We did our election episodes in the order 2008, 2000, 2004. Whatever. Linear chronological time is a Western construct. And so this is the next entry in our series of Carts Before Horses, in that we will be discussing 9/11 conspiracies before we actually do a 9/11 episode. So why are we talking about the conspiracy theory movies, Jordan?
Well, I think specifically by talking about them with the frame of the media around 9/11 conspiracies, there's a lot of different topics that come up. Firstly, the idea of the big budget documentary is this thing of the past, right? Fahrenheit 9/11 grossed like over $100 million. Documentaries don't even go to the theaters anymore. They just go directly to like Amazon Prime
or
Video.
YouTube.
And most of the highest grossing documentaries of all time are from this decade, and that's never going to change. This is it. The Michael Jackson doc, which is the highest grossing documentary of all time. March of the Penguins, Inconvenient Truth, all of Michael Moore's work. Morgan Spurlock.
R.I.P.
R.I.P. to the guy who made a documentary about his diet and didn't mention that he was an alcoholic.
He didn't think it was relevant.
I mean, he's like painfully Irish looking. That should have been assumed, So.
Yeah. Have you seen his face? We're going to be covering 2 movies today. The first, Michael Moore's Fahrenheit 9/11, and secondly, Loose Change, a movie that everybody is aware of, but probably no one has seen in 15 years. Because I think they represent opposites of each other. One is like the big budget, lib 9/11 conspiracy movie, and the other one is the no budget Google video, either apolitical or like libertarian 9/11 conspiracy.
Yeah, and in terms of what it says about the broader picture of the decade, if Fahrenheit 9/11 is a snapshot of the era of big budget docs, imagine if a fucking campaign ad grossed $100 million, and that's what Fahrenheit 9/11 was. On the other hand, we have this video that comes out 2 months after YouTube does and is streamed maybe something like 100 million times. And I feel like the internet changed everything. Observation is so fucking hack and self-evident, and it doesn't need to be said. People will sometimes make the comparison that the internet does kind of feel like a new printing press, but it's a really apt metaphor. So in the same way that printing press basically starts modernity, it also leads pretty directly to like the breaking of the European mind in the 16th century wars of religion. So the internet gives us all of the beautiful things like podcasts. We're coming right to you through it, but also a ton of crankery.
But yeah, it's funny because this is a second printing press. The idea that the internet is being used to publish loose change is like the Gutenberg printing press coming out and it being used to print like the weekly world news immediately. The people need to know about the three-legged griffin that lives in the forest or something.
Dude, I am so sure that's real. I don't actually have any expertise, but I'm willing to bet they were printing the fucking late Renaissance equivalent of the three-legged griffin. No doubt in my mind.
Yeah, like Protestantism. Yeah, that's basically loose change levels of quackery to me.
And of course, looking into these conspiracies and how they are portrayed in these media, conspiracy theories are kind of universal in times of traumatic experiences, right? JFK is gunned down on TV and there's an explosion of conspiracies. There were Pearl Harbor conspiracies after the 1940s. Generally, they thrive in times of trauma. And 9/11 is the big traumatic, everybody remembers where they were event of the 2000s decade. So it's another point in this trend, another example of this phenomenon.
Yeah, and I think one of the points that we're going to build to in this episode is just this idea of how do you not expect people to behave this way? The conspiracies themselves are insanely stupid, but it's perfectly understandable that people would feel this way, given that the people at the very top of society, people like Bush and Cheney, benefited so much from them. The fact that Halliburton got no bid oil contracts in the Middle East and George Bush's Carlyle group that his dad was on the board of, the fact that these people who are at the head of our government benefited so much from 9/11, how do you not expect people to act hysterically when 9/11 happens and immediately think, oh yeah, there's some kind of conspiracy here? The same thing kind of happened with COVID, where it's like, oh, the wealthiest people in society got even richer because of this pandemic and pharmaceutical companies. How do you not expect people to have their brains broken a little bit?
This little factoid that I love, the proportion of Americans who say that they basically trust their government dropped from a high of 73% in 1958, the fucking Leave It to Beaver era, which is when pollsters first started asking this question, to an all-time low of 22% in 2010. And that's lifted from a book that came out shortly after that. So it's probably even lower now. And I think the 9/11 truth movement is, yes, another point in this scattershot plot of how many Americans basically trust their government.
Well, I'm glad you guys are having me on as your conspiracy friend, because I have a very different interpretation of probably these movies. I look at this era of conspiratorial thinking as kind of like a relic, knowing what we know now, as considerably more information has come out. So we'll definitely do so. I'm going to bite back. So for any of your fans who are like, really, God, are you sure about this? You're right. They're wrong. They are so off, and we'll get into that for sure.
This is why we wanted to have you on, because as Ben and I were watching these movies, unfortunately, like Ben and I aren't cynical enough. We're just going to be ripping on these movies for being bad. Like, who's the most skeptical person we know? We're like, Isaac.
Well, I'm glad you made the difference between being cynical and being skeptical, because my interpretation of the pejorative use of the term truther is actually way more cynical. I think it's far more cynical to demonize even like the pursuit of truth is like this postmodern sort of nihilistic, oh, you think you can discover the truth? It's unknowable. It's all inscrutable. And to criticize people who want to look deeper into these things, to me, they're the cynical ones. The New York Times people who are just like shaming the truth movement, which is funny. Like the truth, isn't truth the thing we're all trying to seek?
Yeah, you're a newspaper.
I think that'll be an important distinction to make in this episode on being cynical versus skeptical. Being skeptical is the quality of being not easily convinced and having doubts or reservations. Looking at information and assessing it for veracity. Being cynical, very different. Being cynical is the belief that most people are motivated purely by self-interest. You are distrustful of humanity. Your belief that every actor is only behaving in a self-interested way, that bleak outlook on the morality of others. We really want to talk about that distinction in one of our themes, which is personality of a truther. And so just to road sign for our show today, first we're going to talk about Farhenheit 9/11. Then we're going to talk about loose change and Zeitgeist a bit, which was a listener suggestion. And then our themes, which are first, the personality of the truther. Secondly, what are the distinctive elements of an American conspiracy? Then we'll talk about the internet and its role in conspiracies. And finally, we'll do everyone's favorite section, Echoes in the Culture, where we'll talk about cancellation and 9/11 conspiracies. And finally, QAnon.
Finally, a conspiracy theory for me.
Okay, so let's talk about Farhenheit 9/11. Let's talk about Farhenheit 9/11. No one had seen it, so Ben and I rented an ice cream truck and we played the audio for the entire Crown Heights neighborhood.
If we actually did that with an ice cream truck, a Crown Heights citizen would be within their rights to gun us down.
So let me just give you a little summary on this movie, if it's been a while for you. Hopefully it has. It starts off with a 2000s election recap. George Bush is not the legitimate president of the United States, and he kind of shows you why it was a stolen election. And one of the things the documentary does suffer from is just trying to fit every liberal issue into this movie as possible. And so it's like 2 hours long. Then it's Bush's oil business got huge help from Saudi Arabians and his friend James Bath, which Bush administration tried to conceal, but Michael Moore, too nimble, was able to figure out.
That was pretty sick. You gotta give him credit for that.
Okay, so Ben and I were watching this movie, and we paused it every 30 seconds because I'm like, I don't want to let a single detail pass by me. I want to understand at a base level, what is he suggesting here? And you do really have to pause it quite often to understand every point in the movie because it's so disparate.
There's a lot of names in quick succession. There's a lot of names. There's a lot of businesses.
There's a lot of handshakes between George Bush and Saudi Arabian guys. It was actually much easier to follow the assertions made by Loose Change compared to Farhenheit 9/11.
You actually do need the cork board with the red thread linking everything together for people, you know? There's a reason it's tradition.
Basically, this is like the first thing that he uncovered. And this is the folder on the cover of the movie is suggesting that Michael Moore has the documents and he's going to make public. The main point he's making here is that James Bath was George Bush's roommate during the Vietnam War, like when he was in the, what was he?
Texas
National Reserve.
Texas Air National
Yeah,
Reserve.
the National Reserve. And then James Bath would go on to work for the Saudis and secure 90% of his funding for his initial oil venture via the Saudi money.
Yeah, to put it much more succinctly, the Bushes and the House of Saud are intimately connected. To put it very, very even more simply, one of the major politics and oil families in America is very close with the politics and oil family of Saudi Arabia. Turns out their interests align. Who'd have thunk?
And so his point is that George Bush protected the Saudis from 9/11 investigations, even though we should have been more suspicious of them. And also some valid points about how like the Carlyle Group exists to rent seek essentially from government contracts via their influence with government. And George H.W. Bush is on the board of that group. Then he follows that up with some good points actually about how violent the invasion of Iraq is.
Gruesome footage, by the way.
Yes.
Like, I didn't remember just how gratuitous the footage he used of both dead Iraqis and American soldiers was.
I would call it graphic. I don't know if it's necessarily gratuitous.
Yeah, I wouldn't call it gratuitous.
I think Americans should look at what they have wrought in Iraq.
But gratuitous by movie theater. You're right. It's not something most Americans look at.
There was nowhere else to see this. I mean, maybe if you went to like Al Jazeera or something, but it certainly wasn't on like CNN and not in any other movie where you're going to see the actual horrific human cost of the invasion of Iraq. I really do commend Michael Moore for putting this in a $100 million movie. And just on this footage in Farhenheit 9/11 that is very based, this footage is actually from Al Jazeera, and it's so honest about what was going on in Iraq that Disney, who co-owned Miramax, who was distributing the film, actually had to set up a shell corporation in order to profit from the movie. And there was a lot of profit from the movie. I think it only cost like $6 million to make, and it made $200 million. So Michael Eisner said he was very worried about profiting off a movie that was anti-American, but there was so much money clearly on the table, especially after it won the Palme d'Or, that he was like, hey, I don't want to sell the rights of this movie to anyone else, but I also want the profits, but I don't want the Bush government seeing that I'm profiting from this movie, so let's set up a shell corporation, and then we can get the money from that.
Yeah.
Yeah, there were a handful of things he did that I thought were very very cool. I know it was played out, the 2000 election. We already did that episode together, but one thing I didn't recall and I thought was very telling was when all those Democratic members of Congress stood up and said, we don't accept these results. And Gore himself was saying, like, do you have a senator? No, dismissed. That to me was pretty incredible footage.
Dude, it could have been a lib Jan 6 in that moment, right? It was on like the certification deadline, and every member of the Congressional Black Caucus came up to voice an objection. But because of the procedural rules, the objection could only stand if a senator seconded what a congressperson said. And all of the senators closed ranks. So this was an entirely symbolic gesture. But Al Gore, like the true little cuck pain piggy he is, let himself get dog walked and just asked each of them, do you have a senator? No. Do you have a senator? No.
We're going to respect the rule of law.
The only conspiracy business is the first maybe third of the movie. The rest of the 2/3 are every lib hobby horse issue of 2004. So how violent the war is, which is like maybe more than a lib. Then a bunch of stuff on the Patriot Act. The last 20 to 30 minutes of this 2-hour movie are Michael Moore essentially saying, we really support the troops because we want to bring them home. We're the real patriots. And that last segment is probably what I would call like the tragedy porn segment of the movie. Because the main point, the main takeaway I would say is that this is a full-on lib brain at one point. This man, ostensibly of the left, complains about budget cuts to law enforcement a lot. First, he says it might have led to 9/11 because they cut the FBI counterterrorism unit and they cut the CIA counterterrorism budget. Then later he complains about them cutting the Oregon State Highway Patrol while at the same time doing the Patriot Act.
Keep those fucking Canadians out of here, dude. I'm serious. You gotta build that wall up north.
Yes, so many of his prescriptions are like, we need to hire more police officers.
Which you still see Democrats do today. Joe Biden wants, or RIP, fucking the Kamala Harris ticket is talking about doing the Trump border plan, right? Basically.
Cop Mala, right? Yeah. I keep seeing that footage now of the National Guard and their tanks rolling down Minneapolis suburban streets during the George Floyd protests. And it's like, that's waltz for you, baby. I'm very excited. Brat Summer, here we go.
Yeah, it's incredibly lib brain. So there's a moment where the veteran says, I'm going to do everything I can to get the Democrats back in control because he's so disillusioned.
Oh, yeah. That was so funny.
Michael Moore somehow fails to mention the overwhelming number of Democrats who voted for the war, including the presidential nominee of 2004 when this was coming up.
Yeah, it comes out May of 2004, and it's clearly meant to be a campaign ad for Kerry. This is his pre-2004 election attempt to take back the White House. And it's like, dude, the guy you're arguing for, like, he also voted to authorize the war in Iraq. You don't give any time to highlighting people like Bernie Sanders, people who actually did vote against the war in Iraq. Why not interview some of them for the documentary?
Yeah, not to mention, it's so full of symbolic bluster. Like, he calls him Mr. Bush instead of President Bush.
Mr. Bush.
And it's like, wow, got his ass.
Just to finish up here, I just want to mention the things that I did like about Farhenheit 9/11. One, I did like the montage of crisis grifters.
Incredible.
People selling the panic room, the advertisement for the panic room. Hilarious. The emergency shoot.
Yes.
The terror alert that was making people in like Saginaw. It was like someone in the world's smallest town in Michigan being like, well, you know, Midland is close by.
Yeah. Some of these won't work as a sound drop because you really do need to see the advertisement for the panic room and the emergency shoot. But we will absolutely put a sound drop of this local news report on the bravery of Saginaw citizens continuing to shop despite the terror alert.
Right.
Well, despite the raising of the terror alert level, residents here in Saginaw are continuing with their Christmas errands. Frances Stroik and her family do some last-minute holiday shopping, knowing that Al-Qaeda is planning to attack America. She says being in Saginaw doesn't make her feel any safer than if she was in New York City.
Midland is close by. And I said, Detroit's not that far away. I said, they could be something, and Flint, this could be something, be concerns for people around here.
Well, you never know where they're going to hit. You never know where they're going to hit.
But one potential target specifically mentioned by the terrorist has security officials baffled. It's tiny Tappahannock, Virginia, population 2016. Such an attack could generate widespread fear that even here in rural small-town America, no one is entirely safe.
And I like that Michael Moore has a style when he's doing his obnoxious thing, like driving the fucking ice cream truck around.
Oh, his pranks. Yeah, it's obnoxious
his
pranks.
Going to the Saudi embassy. Or when he's speaking to the military recruitment guys, I actually turned to Ben and I was like, there's no way this is real, right? When he's speaking to the military recruiters who are going to high school kids and being like, oh, you like basketball? You know, you like music? Actually, Elvis was in the army and he became a musician.
You know who Shaggy is?
Yeah.
You know who Shaggy is? That was my favorite one. Do you want to be Shaggy?
Yeah, or David Robinson was in the army. You want me to come pick you up to drive you to the recruitment appointment? Just showing you how pushy these salesmen are with dealing out violence. I was like, oh, this is fake. Why would this guy agree to be videoed like this? And I looked him up, and that's a real guy. And the reason why he was home and doing recruitment, he was normally soldiering, but he donated a kidney to his uncle, so he had to take 6 months off. And he's like, oh, I can do recruiting while I'm home. That's how I can support the war effort. That man would later die in a roadside bomb accident. Or not accident, sorry, roadside bomb attack.
Whoopsies.
You know what? Fucking kudos, Michael Moore. Last thing we want to mention is that this movie, executive producer Harvey Weinstein.
Yeah, that made me crack up when I saw it at the end.
Michael Moore should do like a meta documentary about how Michael Moore should have known that Harvey Weinstein was a sexual abuser. What did Michael know? What did he not know? And do like an interview with himself where he walks out of the interview.
That would be sick, dude. That would be a piece of performance art that I can get behind. Yeah, it's an incredible time capsule of the year of our Lord, 2004. If you want to take a trip down memory lane.
We should make a shuffle cut of that movie where we just make it into a good movie.
For Michael Moore, no fat shaming here.
He's from Michigan. He can't help it.
Okay, yeah,
That's their culture, Isaac.
It's congenital. But to subject the viewer to his face as much as he does, it's like he gets off on it, making you look at him and making himself such a central figure. I know he's like trying to be like the Alfred Hitchcock of documentaries or something, but it pisses me off. Like, I don't want to see you, dude.
The most grating parts of the film are his pranks and japes in Washington, D.C. There are like 3 different scenes. One where he reads the Patriot Act aloud through a megaphone of an ice cream truck because so few members of Congress read it.
He ate all the ice cream first before.
He's like, Homer, ooh, that's raspberry. There's the second prank or jape where he's filming the Saudi Arabian embassy, and you know he gets so fucking happy because the Secret Service detail comes and asks him questions because he's filming the Saudi Arabian embassy. And then there's a third one. It's what closes the documentary where he just accosts members of Congress and asks them if their kids would serve in Iraq.
That was all right.
This is what makes Michael Moore an auteur, though.
Yeah.
He has a very distinctive shenanigans style in his documentaries that it's almost like reality TV meets a documentary or something. Like, nobody else does this, right? Like, Morgan Spurlock, I mean, maybe he does like his little stunt, but none of these documentaries that come out on Netflix, will they talk to Congress people and be like...
Well, they put their own creator in front of the mic, in front of the camera doing japes, pranks, shenanigans.
Michael Moore also has like a very distinctive cadence, right?
Yeah, it's what Giordano's been doing.
But it's to me, it's like the Midwest version of like Adam Curtis's cadence, you know, where it's like, and then something strange happened.
Yes.
Can you do that with Michael Moore?
And then something strange happened.
So that's the biggest problem with the thing, is that it's just full on lib-pilled.
There is actually like a good movie in here. It's just like you said, Ben, he's trying to fit in every single hobby horse. And it's like, this is already over 2 hours. You don't need to put the fucking Oregon border thing in here. Just stick to the parts that actually hit, and he'd have a fucking based documentary on his hands here.
Oh yeah, the scene where he goes through the national security state, putting an undercover agent in a group of aging hippie boomers who are a non-violent anti-war group, and one of their members goes missing because he dies in a car accident, and they're like, oh yeah, he stopped coming to our meetings, and then we read in his obituary he was secretly an FBI agent.
I thought that was pretty good.
Yeah, that's one of the bits that rocks.
And the mother, I think the scene where she cried, or that confrontation in front of the White House with that like weird lady with the strangest voice you've ever heard, and then that Karen conservative comes up and says, we must support our president. Then she like breaks down like, my son died, and like that got me choked up. I was affected by that. She was also she was a great character. I thought kind of like a hyper sympathetic, checked conservative and liberal boxes for your ideal candidate to propagandize your side.
Yeah, that's why it's a campaign video, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And that's the part where you're saying it's like misery porn.
Yes.
They found the woman whose son had died in Iraq, whose outlook on patriotism patriotism and being in Iraq changed after she had to deal with the fact that her son made this sacrifice that may have been for naught.
Yeah, when he has her read his last letter home and keeps the camera on her, that's where I was like, come on, man, we don't need to see this.
I just want to mention, too, that one of the things that also detracts from this movie is just that he's trying to have his cake and eat it, too. In this case, it's because, okay, he spends maybe 6 minutes reminding us of, like, how often George Bush plays golf. And he, at one point, probably the loudest Ben and I laughed while watching this movie was like, it's September 10th and George Bush is playing golf. Maybe if he had read the security briefing that he had been given, he would have known an attack was coming. And he like zooms in on the manila envelope that George Bush has on his like golf bag to sort of imply like the plan was right there. If you had just bothered to open the manila envelope.
If only this idiot had done the homework, he could have stopped 9/11.
Yeah. Why I say he's trying to have his cake and eat it too is because he's also suggesting that George Bush did 9/11, that he's too lazy to have stopped it, but also that he was like a scheming genius to like do it for his own ends.
Yes. He gestures to all this evidence, but for respectability reasons, it's an election year. He can't say the 4 most beautiful words in the English language, Bush did 9/11. He can't say that cellar door. He needs to just, here's a whole bunch of stuff. I used to be in grad school and I graded a lot of undergraduate writing. This movie is a whole lot of supportive evidence without a thesis or an argument, which is the opposite of what we'll see with Loose Change in a little bit, which is a very strong thesis, but no evidence. He can't just say it. That's why it's like barely a 9/11 conspiracy movie, because he doesn't actually say, here's what they did and here's how it happened. But he does say like, well, isn't it curious how tight all these people are with one another? Yeah. Wonder what all that's about.
And you know what else he never does is he speaks to why George Bush may have been involved in 9/11, but he never says, what were the stated goals of Al-Qaeda? Why did they do 9/11? Because I think he would have to say that it's for 2 reasons. 1, because we have military bases in Saudi Arabia, and 2, because of our political support for Israel. But because it's based in liberal respectability politics, he can't bring himself to say that. Instead, he has to sort of gesture that it's like this Rube Goldberg machine of benefiting George Bush in some way.
It's all about Unicom, dude.
Yeah.
You know, that company that's on every American's mind, Unicom, as opposed to like the 900 military bases, the unconditional support for Israel, and a little thing called Operation Cyclone, the secret CIA program to fund the Mujahideen that's so secret they made a movie about it called Charlie Wilson's War. That got a like, none of that gets mentioned ever in this film. Or no, sorry, there's one quick offhanded remark about the Mujahideen, and I think it's still praising them for resisting the Soviets.
I think it was when they were first talking about Bin Laden, funding Bin Laden.
Right.
Prior.
Yeah. And he goes in this giant convoluted trip to suggest that George Bush has friends that may have been Saudi Arabian. When it seems like the Occam's razor approach would have, 1, shortened the movie, but also for him to be like, listen, Cheney's ex-company Halliburton got no bid oil services contracts for Iraq in December before the invasion through their subsidiary. They had the subsidiary named KBR that made a ton of money off of the invasion of Iraq. And Cheney got $62 million from them as a retirement gift. Then we see Halliburton getting all of these no-bid contracts, and it's like, can't you just point directly to that? Why do we have to go in this giant circle of James Bath? And
it is disappointing. I mean, when I first saw this movie, I was not so conspiracy pilled as I am today, and it was novel and interesting. And I think it also does date itself as the relic that it is in terms of American conspiratorial thinking. This is like pretty normie shit at this point. And knowing what I know now, and especially the amount that Prince Bandar features in this film, is actually quite interesting, because that guy did 9/11 actually. Osama bin Laden, innocent, seriously.
No.
Yes, dude, he didn't do it.
he copped to it.
Yeah. I don't think there's compelling enough evidence, and maybe it would benefit him to have claimed to have done it after the fact. I mean, you see ISIS do this all the time, where they are, I really don't want to, okay, sorry. But it does feature, it tickles little characters or subjects that now feature greatly into people who are into parapolitical thinking.
In the lore.
Yeah, the lore. And I do want to talk about the word lore as we get going.
And I just want to say, listener, that the original idea for this episode was for Ben and I to talk about the media of 9/11 conspiracies, and then for Isaac on his show to sound off on like the conspiracies themselves. And so if you would like to bully Isaac into doing that, leave a comment on this video telling him to do so.
But that's the thing is, it's fucking nerd shit, man. And it's been done. The lore, the characters.
Where would you go to find this right now?
I mean, the book I would recommend is Peter Dale Scott's Road to 9/11.
Okay.
Peter Dale Scott, Canadian guy. So yeah,
Hey,
there
okay.
you go.
Wow.
The only good one. I mean, God, he's like almost 100 years old now, but he's still kicking, still writing, kind of incredible stuff. But he's also credited with coming up with the term deep state. We call it deep politics. He has thoroughly explained the motivations behind why it's very likely that the United States government did 9/11. And he points to things like the Project for a New American Century and continuity of government in particular. That's the one that is most interesting. But again, it's a very thick book, tons of details, fucking boring, honestly. I'm kind of bored in 9/11 lore because it's nerd shit. There's so many characters and company names and things to keep up with that it becomes exhausting, and even explaining it to somebody is useless. It's futile. Again, in one ear, out the other. I was brushing up on my 9/11 shit for this episode, and I was like, oh fuck, dude, this is so annoying. I don't want to do it. And instead, I think, and we can get into this too later, the echoes in the culture, whatever, there's like a simpler way to interpret all these things.
Okay.
Yeah, we can get to the same conclusion while doing simpler math. We don't need to show every step.
Right.
I'm like Socrates, man. All I know is that I don't know anything. I don't know what happened on that sunny September day. I do know that the government did horrible things after it and used it as an excuse for that. I feel like that's kind of all I need to know.
So where is everybody in the Miho or Liho camp, would you say? Which is the let it happen or made it happen?
Oh, obviously I'm in the made it happen. The thing is, I used to be very much in the, not even let it happen, but like the Bush administration was incompetent. Because he was portrayed as such a bumbling fool, I was like, oh yeah, he's stupid. Of course it happened. And I didn't believe in the nefariousness of it. So this is the first time I watched Loose Change was in preparation for this episode, because yeah, when it came out when I was that age or whatever, I was just like, I don't care. That sounds crazy to me. That's a conspiracy theory. That's a conspiracy. I don't indulge in conspiracies. But my opinion has changed significantly since then, largely because, I don't know if I've told you guys this story before, but I have a very intimate connection with the day of 9/11.
I was laying the thermite charges in Tower 7.
I wish.
You got your call. They said, don't go into work today.
Oh, you're one of the ones who was dancing on the rooftops.
I just went to the memorial, because I'm in New York, and I was just looking at all the Jewish names that were carved into that metal. They could be fake, who knows? I mean, but a lot of Baums and Steens there, so checkmate, guys. I don't know. No, I am from Sarasota, Florida. That was my school. I was there when George Bush was reading My Pet Goat. I wasn't in that classroom, but I was in that middle school of that elementary school. Not only that, but where I live now, Muhammad Atta lived down the street from me. He would go to the Shamrock Pub on Ringling Boulevard, 3 blocks away from me. The terrorist lived and trained in my hometown. And I would end up writing a story for the 20th anniversary about the Saudi family that fled days prior to 9/11, and how there was security cam footage of Muhammad Atta coming and going in this subdevelopment, and how the CIA and FBI continues to hide that particular information that we only learned about in 2011. That's when the information was at first leaked to this journalist, Dan Christensen. So, I don't know, as time went on, I think my opinion of 9/11 changed significantly as my understanding of the world changed. And I think that the 2016 election is like that pivotal moment when I was just like, this fucking world is weird, right? And so I am firmly now in the United States government did it. But to say Bush did it is also maybe helpful, but also not. I don't know. So where are you guys? I talked a lot.
I don't think I'm definitely not a Miho, and I don't think I'm a Liho either. But I'm also not as skeptical or cynical, I guess.
So what do you think happened?
I just think that this horrible terrorist attack happened, and it was like a never let a crisis go to waste situation for the Bush government, where they're like, oh, we can do whatever we want. We can pass the Patriot Act. We can open up a slush fund of $3 trillion to our friends. This rules.
Invade Iraq. Yeah. I'm probably between you two. At my most maximalist, I'd be a lie hop. I saw there was a P at the end of it. Make it happen on purpose or let it happen on purpose. I like it because it rhymes with pancake restaurant. But at my most maximalist, I might think that someone knew. Probably not Bush, probably not Cheney, probably not anyone in quote unquote civilian leadership. But do I think that someone in one of the 3-letter agencies knew something was going down? Probably. We do know that they spent 15 years funneling tens of billions of dollars to these people. We do know that Khalid Sheikh Mohammed learned how to make bombs from a CIA manual. These are not uncontroversial statements to say.
Also, congratulations to KSM for pleading guilty and not facing a trial, which is very curious, don't you think? And that's a whole other fucking conspiracy. I don't know if we can talk about the word conspiracy and stuff.
Okay. Anything else you want to say about general 9/11 thoughts before we move on to loose change?
I have a lot more to say about loose change than I do about Fahrenheit 9/11. Fahrenheit 9/11, yeah, it's just like, to me, it's milquetoast.
Yeah.
I don't really...
It's liberal drivel. And you can't even say if Michael Moore is a lie hop or my hop because he never explicitly says what he thinks happened. And so if you were to ask, does Michael Moore think George Bush made it happen or let it happen? I don't know that you could say that from watching this movie.
You could say Mr. Bush is an illegitimate president. Some kind of deflection like that.
But loose change, that is not the case. This is a definitively my hop movie. It very much suggests that the government did 9/11, that it was a controlled demolition.
Damn straight.
So if Michael Moore's movie, as I said, was evidence, here's all these connections, without a thesis, Bush did 9/11, loose change is the inverse. It's the thesis, Bush did 9/11, without much evidence. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Isaac. One thing that I love about this movie is that there's a ton of just easily fact-checked and debunkable things. The movie is flush with them. That's part of why it keeps getting re-released. There are so many cuts of loose change. This movie comes out in April of 2005. It is re-released in December of 2005. Couldn't make it one calendar year without a recut. 2006, 2007, 2009, 2015, and 2017. But also, and this is what's very, postmodern about this, when the creators are challenged and they're like, hey, here's all this shit that a simple Google search will tell you why you're wrong, they say that they leave it in on purpose as a spur, as a goad, as encouragement to people to do their own research. And I wish I knew this one weird trick when I was in graduate school. Would have graduated a lot fucking faster, let me tell you. But this film has been streamed more than 100 million times, which means this glorified PowerPoint presentation is one of the most successful independent documentaries of all time. So as much as you might want to shrug it off as like prankery, a ton of people watch this. And I was listening to a pod, I forget which one, but they had like a leftist pilled veteran who said they would sell this film on DVD outside of US military bases in Iraq. And I sincerely hope that was the Iraqis doing it. I sincerely hope it was like, hey man, you gotta watch this. You gotta figure out what's really going on here.
This was the first time I bothered watching Loose Change, and I didn't get to watch the version you sent me because it was an AVI, and so I just found I think it was like the second edition I found. It was a little bit more polished. They invited that guy Jason Burmas on the show to kind of like gussy it up a bit more. They had a higher production value than I guess the original version did. It looked better than I thought it was going to. I thought it would look a lot shittier, a lot more DIY quality, but it actually looked okay to me.
Yeah, well, that must have been a later version then, because the original looks horrible.
It looks like shit, dude.
When I looked it up, it was like, this was made by a guy who was like 20 years old, and it shows. And I think it's impressive for like a 20-year-old with no budget, but in terms of a documentary film, by the standards of things I would normally watch, it looks horrible. And it's a lot of him just pausing and pointing and speaking extremely confidently and moving on. He'll look at the underside of the plane and be like, look, there's charges on the bottom of this plane, and then move on. And if you're stoned and like 20, you'd be like, oh, whoa. But I think most of the time I had the reaction of going, is there something on the bottom of this plane?
I can't see shit in this grainy ass photo.
Yeah.
So the main claims put forward by Loose Change, these are more or less in the order that he does them. Claim number one that we've all heard before, it was a controlled demolition, right? This is your classic, it's become a meme, jet fuel can't melt steel beams.
Right.
So he says the towers fell too fast. He loves to quote eyewitnesses from that day who were there. And I do love the strategy of taking people on the most traumatizing and disorienting day of their lives. How many thousands of eyewitnesses were there who are all going to say a million different things? It's like the most complex Rashomon in the world. And he just chooses these ones who are like, oh, I'm so sure I heard multiple explosions. And I might do a sound drop here, but you kind of need the visuals. There's a great report from a YouTube blacksmith who's this fucking redneck
seen
who
that guy,
uses the R slur that shows you that you can make steel beams melt like a noodle at much, much lower temperatures than jet fuel burns. The point is that it's one of these things that, again, the fact checkers have gotten to, and the voiceover will ask things like, how could the windows of the lobby be exploded by a plane hitting the upper floors? And I found myself saying, I don't know, maybe the 1970s mob didn't build the building good enough.
Yeah, or how am I supposed to know how force reverberates through like a 110-story building?
Maybe this helps your case, but both buildings were set to be condemned because of asbestos issues. So that could mean, well, it was built shitty, or it could mean they actually really wanted to get rid of that shit. So, you know, it could be either one.
Is this the movie, or is it Zeitgeist that suggests that George Bush's other brother, I think it's Zeitgeist.
No, it's this one. It's this one.
Okay, yeah, George Bush has like a third brother, not Jeb. The only time I've ever heard of this guy,
Marvin.
Marvin Bush.
Marvin the Martian Bush.
I love this. George W. Bush's brother, Marvin, had once, but not at the time of 9/11, had once been on the board of directors for a company called Securicom that provided security for the World Trade Center. This is the kind of factoid connection that Loose Change is going to try and make a bunch of hay out of.
Do you know who did actually do security for the World Trade Center?
Who?
Nick Kroll's father. Nick Kroll, he has the worst kind of blood money on his hands.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah,
Really?
so.
I didn't know that.
He did 9/11. Nick Kroll did 9/11.
Oh my God, jet fuel can't melt steel beams. Yeah, no, that guy is insanely wealthy.
I love imagining in this conspiracy theory world just an exchange where Marvin is on the phone. He goes, hey, George, it's Marvin, your brother, Marvin Bush. You know that iconic American building you've been looking for your false flag attack? Take a look at this.
Let's move on to the second thesis that this movie presents, which is that Flight 93 was shot down. In general, this is another one that I don't believe happened, but I think is probably the most plausible. This is based on the witness accounts that day that say that they saw a second plane, which very much resembles the description of a Tomcat U.S. jet, saying that actually what happened to Flight 93 isn't that they overtook the cockpit, it's that we shot that plane down to prevent another attack. I don't believe in this primarily because I think most people would be pretty understanding if the government did come out and say we shot it down. People would be like, yeah, that makes sense. Also, listening to those phone calls from the people on Flight 93, they say that they were faked, but I don't know, they sound pretty heart-wrenching and real to me. What did you think of the Flight 93 being shot down?
Well, this is where you can have conflicting theories. One is that after the first plane hit the tower, no planes should have been able to get anywhere near the second tower. And there's a pretty good case for there was like a bizarre lapse in informing NORAD to take care of this and make sure everything's fine, that we are in fact under attack. But as for this one, to me, it's not one that I think about too much. Mark Wahlberg was on that flight, right?
No,
He's the one who prevented.
This one, I believe, took off at Newark. Yeah, sorry. Well,
come on, yes and, motherfucker.
Imagine Mark Wahlberg saying, let's roll.
Yeah, let's roll. Let's go. Come on. It's actually very interesting on this flight. I think it is, apart from the firefighters, the most heroic story from 9/11, because what happens is the one thing that Osama bin Laden didn't account for was that he needed 4 planes to take off on time. Which, yeah, good luck, buddy. And so this Flight 93 took off 45 minutes late, which means that by the time it was in the air, some of the other attacks had already occurred and passengers were making phone calls. And, you know, it's very difficult to stop passengers from using their cell phone on the plane, as evidenced by the West Wing opening scene.
You can't use your cell phone on the plane. Your cell phone towers cannot reach.
I think it was 1, flying low, and 2, they were using the plane phone.
Okay. Yeah, the plane phone, yeah, but not your cell phone.
And so the terrorists were telling them, like, don't worry, our demands have already been met, and so we're going to land the plane and we're going to get whatever we wanted. But at this point, their family members are telling them this is a suicide mission. And so they take a vote. They actually voted. Pokemon went to the polls to vote on retaking the cockpit. And funnily enough, yeah, the target that it was headed towards was the United States Congress.
That's the one. Too bad, dude. Fuck, dude. I don't like those people now. I would have been sick.
Democracy does not work.
Yeah, so they voted to save Congress, our Democrats.
Yeah, fucking idiot.
That's so grim to think about. Congress would not reciprocate.
Yeah, exactly.
One of my favorite conspiracy theories, also in that it's totally harmless, is that, Isaac, you're wrong. Cell phones actually work fine on airplanes. That whole business about airplane mode, the airline companies don't want you calling your friends and telling you you're having a bad time.
Maybe so people stop jerking off on the plane watching porn too. I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, you can also save pornography locally.
Wait, what? I've never thought of that.
Yeah, just save the Wikipedia article for Doggy Style locally, and then you can read it whenever you want. It was funny, we did talk about The Dark Knight on this pod, and I feel like it's kind of a similar situation. People in a hostage situation voting to do the right thing. And actually, they used the beverage cart to overtake the planes, because I think there were 40 passengers and 4 hijackers on that plane. Every plane was supposed to have 4 bodyguards and a pilot, and one guy couldn't get through at Orlando, so it only had 3 bodyguards. And so they were able to be overtaken, and then when they overtook the cockpit, he crashed the plane.
So maybe my favorite from Loose Change is the theory that no plane struck the Pentagon. It was a cruise missile.
Yes.
Again, very specific in exactly how this happened. And his main piece of evidence is that the hole in the Pentagon doesn't line up with the shape of a plane. It's very much like a Looney Tunes Flintstone style argument. And I have an exceptional screen cap that may be the episode art of the plane with the bits in red and lining it up against the hole. Very highly scientific. But this part of the movie goes into a lot of aeronautical engineering detail.
Yeah, nerd shit.
Nerd
it's
shit.
Fucking boring.
It's boring ass nerd shit. But the one thing I'll say, the most compelling piece of evidence I'll give you, Isaac, because I know you're probably getting...
I didn't make this movie. Why are you talking to me like that?
Because I'm sure you're getting frustrated with our normie asses shitting on the truthers. The most compelling piece of evidence that this movie gave me is Boeing made all of these planes. And I'm like, oh, the company gunning down whistleblowers like it's the end of Inglourious Bastards? Okay, maybe there's something here, right? Because Loose Change claims that Boeing engines were made of pure titanium, whose melting point is lower than the highest possible burning point of kerosene. Maybe Boeing was cost cutting and it's just not made of titanium.
My favorite piece of evidence from this section was that they pointed out that Donald Rumsfeld's office is on the opposite side of the Pentagon from where it was hit. And so it's like Donald Rumsfeld did 9/11, but he aimed it at the part of the Pentagon where his office is. Like that would have been at all a concern when planning 9/11. I want you to hit the Pentagon. I want you to hit the other side because I don't want my space to be fucked up.
Well, I mean, yeah, I'm going to come into work that day. It would be suspicious if I didn't.
That's it for the Pentagon. I mean, this part I thought was genuinely entertaining because I was able to buy into it a bit more because it is a weird shape, like
It's a demonic shape, actually.
It doesn't look like a plane hit it, but what do I know about that?
It is weird. The footage is weird. The fact that it took so long to release it's very weird. The fact there's only like a couple of shots of it, very weird. And the shots they do give you don't see a plane.
They confiscated all the video evidence. They didn't release it.
And the fact that the Pentagon would somehow not be able to defend itself, or there wouldn't have been shot down before it reached the Pentagon at this point. The fact that this is one of those things where like they say this in the movie and I've heard this before. I don't bother fact checking it, mostly because these are the conspiracies. All of Loose Change's conspiracies, I don't give a fuck about. Those aren't the good ones. Those aren't the ones that matter. So, but the fact that the plane hit the one spot in the Pentagon that was like missile proof.
Yeah, the one reinforced wall.
One reinforced wall. So, I think what this movie does is it presents a ton of fucking coincidences for you to be like, that is pretty weird, right? Mm-hmm. So again, these aren't the ones that I personally care about. So when you say I'm getting mad, I'm like, no, I don't really care, dude.
So dunk on it with us,
Well, I know you guys are doing you guys are doing great dunking. I made the Mark Wahlberg joke. Come on.
Okay, sorry. So yeah, Tower 7 is also the other thesis that the movie has, which is that like, hey, isn't it weird that this building that was beside the collapse of two of the largest
to say
buildings
beside is a little generous too. This is
across the street.
This one is Tower 7 is fucking weird.
It's the weirdest.
That one's
for
weird.
A few reasons, but yeah, namely that like okay,
how big that tower was.
There's no jet fuel that's in that building, right? So the assumption is that it somehow burned down from a regular fire
and falling debris.
And yeah, like debris that hit Tower 7, which I don't know, if two of the largest buildings in the world collapse across the street, like
why didn't any other ones though? I mean, why just the that? So that's what's so strange. It is very strange. This is the one I think you can, like, if you want to pill people on, this one's the easiest one to be like, what the fuck, dude? Or is it, like you said, is our infrastructure really that bad?
I mean, the Miami condo collapsed because it got rained on 2 years ago.
Okay. You're encroaching on my territory. I'm from Florida. That shit is fucked up, dude. That is bad.
I do think it's interesting that Tower 7 had all of the evidence for the WorldCom scandal.
There's a bunch of stuff, that whole CIA floor. It's incredibly weird, and I've already forgotten it. I remember I've listened to whole fucking spiels on Building 7 and why they wanted that one to be destroyed, and I forgot. There's just so much. In one ear, out the other at this point.
I mean, the main thing that pills me is the fucking passport that they found in the rubble. That was the real, like, they're dabbing on us moment where, as Loose Change points out, all of the black boxes, the things designed to survive any plane crash, all of the black boxes are unaccounted for, destroyed.
Yeah.
But a passport, comma, made of paper, comma, Loose Change adds helpfully, is found in the rubble, thereby immediately pointing to who did it.
Yeah.
It's very convenient.
Because they discovered the terrorists, the hijackers, very quickly thereafter. Like, normally that's something that would take a little while, but they seem to know pretty early on. That's one of the conspiracies as well. My favorite little one, I don't think Loose Change touches on it, but is Larry Silverstein not going to work that day? The one Jew who actually didn't go? Larry Silverstein was the owner of the Twin Towers, and he's heavily implicated in conspiracies. But for whatever reason, he was known for never missing work and always being on time, except for this day, because his wife was like, I need you to see the doctor today, which is believable as a Jew. However, again, a lot of conspiracies and stuff like this, how much tolerance do you have for coincidences before you're just like, I can't do this anymore. This is too fucking weird. So I think the more you look into it and the more coincidences that they point out, you're like, that's a lot. That's a lot of coincidences.
That's why I go with the straight Socratic agnosticism approach. I don't know what happened that day.
Well, some people are curious, intellectual curious. Not me, but like I said. Yeah, so basically this is another controlled demolition because it destroyed all of the Secret Service investigative files as well as the WorldCom investigation files. So also there's a motive.
And my homework, that's why I couldn't turn it in.
I swear I had an N-word pass. It was at Building 7. It was not recovered in the rubble.
One of the funniest Loose Change voiceover moments is when he says World Trade Tower 7 would be only the third building in history to collapse because of a fire. The first two, the Twin Towers. And I know what he means. He means skyscraper, because then he points to all these skyscrapers that had fires but didn't fall down. But the fact that he says the third building to ever collapse, I'm like, buildings collapse from fires all the time, man. That's what kills firefighters.
Need a better editor, that's true.
Yeah.
Where were you to help him?
Well, actually, since we just talked about editors, maybe we'll just talk about, like, he did get a lot of help in the later versions, including a larger budget. Mark Cuban offered to sponsor the third version of this movie, and it was going to be narrated by Charlie Sheen.
Let's go.
Who would end up in that other 9/11 movie? I can't remember. He's like in an elevator for most of it, I think it was. For whatever reason, I want to say Whoopi Goldberg's in it too, but I know that's not true. Consider, I think, the worst 9/11 movie.
And Alex Jones was associated with a later production of this film. And I did order the Alex Jones 9/11 conspiracy DVD, but it hasn't arrived yet. So sadly, that will have to wait for a future episode.
The closing voiceover says that the USA has been taken over by tyrants and that we need to be like the heroes of the story of Flight 93 and come together and rise up against them. It's like, you just said they were voice clones.
You just said it was shot down. Just to say some of the good things about Loose Change. One, the delivery was very compelling. The confidence and dispassionateness of the speaker was, a very compelling way to tell the story. And also the soundtrack, incredible. This progressive lo-fi, very, very good. And some of these artists went on to work with some fairly well-known musicians, including MF Doom. Really good job on being ahead of the curve culturally and picking these soundtracks up.
Yeah, if you listen to a lot of lo-fi hip-hop beats to study and relax to, boy, do I have a conspiracy theory film for you.
Lo-fi beats to question the government's complicity in 9/11 too.
Lo-fi hip-hop beats to lay thermite charges to.
Yeah, lo-fi beats to conspire to. Ben and I should also just quickly mention, we watched Zeitgeist. That one's very funny because it's 3 parts.
The middle part is your 9/11 conspiracy, right? And it's just like Loose Change. They actually put a paragraph that's the government's official explanation, and they zoom in on individual phrases, and then they debunk that. And you might think that's the maximalist conspiracy, but wait till I tell you what the other 2/3 of Zeitgeist are about. The first third is about how all of organized religion is fake.
Yeah.
About how Jesus is actually just an inept copy of Ra and Osiris and a whole host of other ancient Near Eastern divinities. And the last third is about how all of monetary policy dating back the last 400 years has been an elaborate trap to ensnare you in debt bondage. So 9/11 looks pretty banal in comparison to the other 2/3. It is a brilliant, like, you've heard of the compliment sandwich, nice thing, mean thing, nice thing. It's like that, but like outlandish. No, I can see it. Outlandish.
Yeah, I thought it was very like Dan Brown-esque in that way. That was like Ben and I's first good episode, actually. So go ahead and listen to our Da Vinci Code episode if you haven't yet. But he does such a good job of interweaving the conspiracy with fact. And I thought that that was kind of what this doc was going for, where it's like, oh, did you know that religion is bullshit? And which is like a very 2000s thing to do, right? At this point, like, oh, who cares, dude? Yeah.
Zeitgeist literally plays a George Carlin clip.
Yeah.
All right, buddy.
Yeah.
Aesthetically, though, I found it more pleasing.
Yes.
Yeah, I think the soundtrack's better, and just visually, it's more.
Oh, 1,000%. Yeah, it was sort of like, I mean, not as good as something like Samsara, but like it kind of had. It was actually trying aesthetically to do something, unlike Loose Change, which is PowerPoint presentation.
The ending I saw, I don't know if the first one's called An American Coup, but the second one, it does end, I think, where, like I always say with a lot of conspiracies, QAnon included, they got the answer right, but the math is all wrong. And so at the end of it, the conclusion he makes, which I think is hard to disagree with, but then the movie itself, and we can talk about this especially with Alex Jones and shit coding, which I think this documentary is an example of.
What is that term? What is shit coding?
Shit coding, Fed coding, they call it too, where it's kind of in the controlled opposition world of we're going to let some truth get out right now. And controlled opposition is an actual documented intelligence tactic to feed people some truth, but oftentimes giving it to untrustworthy people to spoil that truth. Alex Jones is, without a doubt, controlled opposition. And it's no coincidence that he became, for quite a long time, and still to this day, the voice of the quote-unquote truther movement. And I don't think that's by accident. And then this movie in particular, because, and I noticed you guys, what you focused, like the theories you focused on, you left out Project for a New American Century and a lot of the curious stuff, the boring stuff about the procedure of how the hijackers arrived to the United States. Of course, this information would only come out much later because of discoveries in my hometown, Sarasota, which I'm very proud of. But the controlled demolition stuff is sexy, right? And that's what everyone thinks of. The dismissive jet fuel can't melt steel beams is a joke, right? You say that to be dismissive. And that's the only theory that most people know about. There are so many other weird things, boring things that don't get any attention, that if you do look at them more closely, you're like, okay, that's fucking strange stuff. But it's the controlled demo. That's what gets all the attention because it's like probably the easiest to understand, I guess, as opposed to like the more boring things with the Saudis.
Yeah, it's also probably the easiest to debunk, right?
Yeah, to the degree that things have been debunked. Because, you know, I compare this movie to, and this is the good of the movie, I guess, to stay on track here for sure.
No, I just like to be aware. I'm not looking at my watch and tapping my foot.
He's giving me like the comedy light, the red light. I see that fucking hook cane, that sheep cane about to go. So the good of this movie, I compare this documentary to the movie JFK, Oliver Stone's JFK, which is a great movie. It also forced the Bush administration to promise to release assassination records. And subsequently, a lot of the stuff we know today, like the terms Operation Northwoods, come from those released documents because the movie was so compelling to so many people, even though it got a lot of criticism for making up some things here and there, like artistically, right? It's a movie. He bent some things, but for the most part, quite true. And so the good that this movie did by not being journalistically accurate, but like, I guess, spiritually accurate, has done a lot of good. And to maybe a certain extent, Loose Change Changed, I think, at least like got people to start reconsidering the mainstream narrative, which is wrong. And I want to ask you guys, who is more wrong? Who is more inaccurate? Loose Change or Judith Miller in the New York fucking Times? Because I think it's important to compare the two.
That's a good point. I've been owned with facts and logic. Yeah, so I mean, what Judith Miller was like, oh, the government is correct, WMDs exist, right?
The Judith Miller was the sources, quote unquote, she was using,
right,
were just military sources, CIA sources that wanted to further push the United States into war, and she was like, yeah, okay, fine.
That is a very funny distinction, actually, yeah, to be like, oh, this guy Dylan who made Loose Change, crackpot, tinfoil hat, should never be able to get a job. And then it's like, oh, Judith Miller, let's promote her as much as possible.
She won a Pulitzer Prize, I think, before her Iraq War.
Well, you know, honestly, anyone who wins the Pulitzer Prize is sus, and I don't say this as an envious failed journalist or anything like that. But no, Jeffrey fucking Gettleman, the guy who wrote the Screams Without Words, the Israel rape hoax story, this dude should never fucking write again.
Right.
He won a Pulitzer. So like if you win a Pulitzer, you've got fucking skeletons in your closet, chances are. But I think that this movie, this DIY thing, does threaten the sanctity of journalism for a lot of folks. And so they're especially hard on it. And I read that Loose Change article that you guys put in the doc, and I was fucking infuriated by it. Because it's bullshit. Like, the guy says a lot of bullshit. And I'm going to quote one thing here. He says, of course, most of the film's claims are nonsense, and the mysteries it describes generally have benign explanations. The film spawned a cottage industry of debunker blogs, one of which compiled a list of 81 factual errors and 345 unsupported allegations in the film, and no credible study has found any evidence for its central argument that the U.S. government was behind or knew about the attacks. That, at this point, we know is not true. And this was written 2 years ago. There's more and more information coming out that we knew that the terrorists were here. And in fact, we facilitated them being here. So this idea that there's no evidence, it's like, fuck off. That's not true.
I mean, they're being wishy-washy with the details, right? It's like they could know the terrorists here, but not know the details of what they're planning. You know, like the way that they got Reagan out of like Iran-Contra, right? Yeah, like that's how they're going to do it, with like ticky-tacky detail shit.
But then what they do, and this is what frustrates me as someone who is frequently called a conspiracy theorist. He says that QAnon drew on Pizzagate, which drew on the grassy knoll and the protocols of the Elders of Zion. To associate Pizzagate, QAnon, and Elders of Zion with JFK, which again, I think is widely now accepted, because they do this slow fucking drip of information. The most recent one comes not from Trump, as he liked to pretend he released all documents. No, he didn't. He did not release. Each president was required to release all of the JFK documents under Trump. That was like the deadline to release the rest of them. But they issue this executive order being like, oh no, not yet, even though legally they're supposed to. So they just give you this slow little drip of information. The most recent one about Lee Harvey Oswald, and again, this is lore, nerd shit, was that the CIA finally copped that it wasn't a photo of Lee Harvey Oswald at the Mexican embassy, which was a huge part of the Warren Commission's case, proving that it was Lee Harvey Oswald who was the shooter. It's like, oh, actually, that wasn't true this whole time. We knew it, but now, and it will tell you this little thing, so most people don't know. I was like, what are you talking about? Who cares?
I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, I know. It's so weird. I mean, there's just so much this information. It gets frustrating, and you see I'm talking faster and getting more animated, so I sound crazier. And that's what they do. It's by design. So I get frustrated when conspiracy theory thinking or the culture is this umbrella of some fucking properly insane ideas. Now, we know that the Protocols of Elders of Zion is a conspiracy created by the Tsarist government. The government did that. Yes.
No, I mean, you've basically had me convinced. Like, because at first I was like,
Bush did 9/11.
No, well, no. You have me convinced that you may watch this and have some laughs, but if you could snap your fingers and get rid of this piece of media, my answer is definitely no at this point. I'm happy that some people are interested in doing things like this.
I would agree. I'm happy it exists. It's for the better that it exists. I don't fillet the New York Times. I don't believe in the mainstream media, but I guess the question is, what's the next step? And like, for me, the practical next step is like...
vote.
No. No. The practical next step for me is like, I still want healthcare to happen. I still want like and I know I'm drawing a bit of a false dichotomy here. I just feel like there's some people who take these conspiracies and they go to this very bad place of like the entire government and everything it does is bad, right? It becomes like an Alex Jones compound style guy. And I don't know, maybe deep down, scratch the surface, is still a bit of a lib, but
oh yeah.
I want the government to fulfill people's needs. I don't know if you can maintain these two ideas at the same time without your brain breaking. I do want the government to meet people's needs in healthcare and education. And also they did 9/11. I don't know if that's sustainable intellectually.
Right. And I should mention, I'm not a total normie. Like, I do believe that George H.W. Bush was involved in killing Kennedy. I think he knew it was going to happen and helped facilitate it. Please.
Was I in Dallas that day?
I don't remember.
It wouldn't be prudent for me to be in Dallas.
George Bush, where were you on 9/11? I don't remember.
I mean, the FBI for sure killed MLK, right?
That was James Earl Jones. That's not something like that.
If you ever want to shock a normie boomer, there's a great Wikipedia article where you can read the letter that the FBI sent to MLK telling him to kill himself, trying to blackmail him into killing himself. Read it aloud. I did it at the dinner table with my parents once.
Every 13-year-old that is telling me to kill myself in my comments or my DMs is the FBI.
A joke I've tried to do so many times and I don't think it's ever landed is
try one more time.
Yeah, try one more time. I think Watergate was an inside job. I think the government did Watergate.
There's actually it is.
I mean, the joke is that's the point that the Nixon government did Watergate.
Well, it
goes even deeper.
The CIA framed him. Is the short version.
Speaking of HW, there's a new book out by Nick Bryant, the same guy who uncovered the Franklin scandal and Jeffrey Epstein's little black book. He was the one who published it, and Gawker has a new book out about how, they framed Nixon.
Poor, sweet, innocent Nixon.
He's an outsider,
Guy who started the war on drugs and destroyed Southeast Asia. Poor, sweet, a pure victim.
The thing is, you're saying, like, how to square that circle of they can give you healthcare but also do 9/11 is like, that's what fucking gangsters do. Gangsters fucking brutally murder you, but then also be like, hey, here's some cigarettes for your mom, too. So when you have Bush framing Nixon, it's like, because they're thugs and they're just vying for power. To me, it's like a very easy to understand reason why.
Alrighty, let's move on to themes. The themes of 9/11 conspiracies. And we'll start with what makes up a truther. How should we think about these people?
One thing that's pretty fascinating is that, like Isaac alluded to earlier, there's this vision of the conspiracy theorists as manic, tinfoil hat, crank, nut job. And one of the things that's so unique about the 9/11 truthers is that on average, they are not that. I read most of this hack fucking book called Among the Truthers. Do not recommend, do not pick up, awful. But I was able to mine it for some gems. And this guy, who's like a turbo centrist at one of Canada's center-right newspaper columns, he uses words like middle class, polished, professionals to describe the 9/11 truthers. And if you think this is all anecdotal, there was a 2006 Scripps Howard poll of over 1,000 U.S. citizens that found that 36% of Americans believed it was either somewhat likely or very likely that federal officers either participated in the attacks on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon or took no action to stop them. So over a third of Americans were lie hop in 2006. Fucking Obama killed that, right?
Yeah.
Made the libs believe in the system again. But people forget about this sweet moment towards the end of the Bush administration when the libs were kind of based. And in that same poll, about 1/6 of respondents also agreed that it was at least somewhat likely that, quote, the collapse of the Twin Towers in New York was aided by explosives secretly planted in the building, end quote, my hop. So like 1/6 of people were loose change pilled in 2006, right? This is a big, broad tent of people who believe this. So I just want to drop some big name truthers, and you guys can live react as we go, but we got Fidel Castro.
Yeah, how can you not be on his side? I don't understand.
He's got some CIA trauma from all the assassination attempts, so I forgive him. Hugo Chavez. CIA hit him with the cancer gun because he was getting too close to the truth. Former Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad.
I'm seeing a sort of a pattern with all of these.
Yeah, they're all homies, man.
Okay, Jordan, let me break the pattern. Rosie O'Donnell.
She's a dog.
Yeah, if you ever want a great laugh, read through the Twitter feud between Donald Trump and Rosie O'Donnell. I'll just read one for you.
I feel so sorry for Rosie's new partner in love, whose parents are devastated at the thought of their daughter being with Rosie, a true loser.
So Rosie's pretty base. Joy Reid is a backpedaling coward. She claimed her blog was hacked.
Is it the same blog where she's like incredibly homophobic? Is it the same one? Because that's what she did.
Did she?
Yeah, no, it was the same thing. There was like some blog post where she was saying, I think, super homophobic shit. And she's like, the Russians hacked me. I didn't realize she did that with 9/11 too.
Awesome. Sticking in the world of entertainment, Charlie Sheen, almost the narrator on a later edition of Loose Change. Imagine if we got it during his 2010 spiraling.
It's like winning. I don't know, man. I was banging 7-gram rocks and finishing them because that's how I roll. I have one speed. I have one gear. Go. Because I'm me. I'm different. I just have a different constitution. I have a different brain. I have a different heart. I have a different, I get tiger blood, man. I'm too smart to blink, and I cured my brain. That's epic. I expose people to magic. I expose them to something they're never otherwise going to see in their boring, normal lives. And I gave that to them. I may forget about them tomorrow, but they'll live with that memory for the rest of their lives. And that's a gift.
Pivoting to American politics, Minnesota Governor Jesse Ventura, as we've talked about on this pod, American hero. Isaac's preferred presidential candidate, Ralph Nader, signed a petition asking for more investigations to what really went down that day. And Van Jones, I just wanted to take the opportunity to dunk.
Sellout. Yeah. Go cry over Biden some more, bitch.
A lot of people have heard him crying over Joe Biden, but for those of you who don't know, Van Jones once sported epic dreadlocks, San Francisco Maoist civil rights activist.
Wow.
He's now a talking head on CNN. He is a turbo normie lib now, but he lost his job in the Obama administration for also signing on to a 9/11 truth petition. Okay, last two names in this little catalog. Alex Jones, whom we've already talked about, believes those 19 hijackers were stooges who thought they were participating in legitimate military exercises.
How could people in caves do that? Like being racist of the most racist
So
truth theory
sick.
thing? Yeah.
That type of conspiracy thinking is probably my favorite on the right. I don't think 9/11 could have gone down like that because I'm so racist that I can't believe they would be smart enough to get our ass that good.
Yes. His followers believe the hijackers are still alive and document various sightings of them, which I'm sure is just racist microaggressions.
Your local halal guy.
Yeah.
Right. That was something that Loose Change put forward a lot, too. They were like, the hijackers are still alive, so it's a part of no planes theory. But it's like, but how are you able to confirm? It just, what?
It's just an Arabic guy with the same name. And then finally, the last one, Muammar Gaddafi based.
Yeah. I love all these guys.
And I just want to say, Muammar Gaddafi, also a JFK conspiracist guy, great quote from the man himself, claimed that Jack Ruby was an Israeli and declared that the whole world should know that Kennedy wanted to investigate the nuclear reactor of the Israeli demon. But Gaddafi's sickest idea that I just want a chance to put out on the pod, I don't know when I'm ever going to have a chance to talk about Muammar again. He proposed the partition of Switzerland, cutting it up and giving it to Germany, France, and Italy. The same way that Europeans partitioned African countries. He just wanted to uno reverso right back at them and get rid of that fucking country of Nazi bankers. That's why they killed him, actually. It was too good an idea. So, the main take here is that all sorts of people are truthers, man. It is a big, broad tent.
So let's just talk about the nature of an American conspiracy. What makes a conspiracy American?
I don't want to offend Isaac, because Isaac's actually made some really good points, but let me summarize what the normie view of the history of American conspiracy theory is. What makes it uniquely American? And it's wrapped up in three main ideas, right? Christian apocalypse. If you want to imagine this black and white struggle between good and evil, a conspiracy theory is a great frame for that, to elide any kind of nuance. It's also wrapped up in individualism and political populism. So say the centrists about the conspiracy theories, right? There is a conspiracy cabal of a host of elites up there on the top, and we, the victims, are on the bottom, right? It's wrapped up in this individualism of America, of like, they're trying to control us down here. And you can listen to our episode on neo-Westerns for more on individualism in the frontier. And then one thing that I did find kind of interesting in terms of 20th century conspiracy theories, this idea of control through technology that you see throughout 20th century dystopian literature, whether that's Brave New World or fucking 1984, right? This is kind of unheard of in human history because for a long time, without these kinds of technologies, it was very difficult to control masses of people. The thing thing that most writers would be afraid about would not be control, but rather anarchy. That would be the thing that people would most be afraid of. And so the world complexifies in the 20th century. We're not living on farmhouses anymore. We're not living out on the prairie anymore. The world's more complicated. People aren't a yeoman farmer. And this is really disorienting for a lot of people, because along with this rapid technological change comes more sophisticated methods of surveillance and also control. So these are all the things that kind of underlie a lot of this quote unquote conspiratorial thinking. It's a way of making sense of this world through these lenses of Christian apocalypse, individualism, and making sense of a world undergoing rapid technological change. But the last thing I'll quote from this shit hack book, the number one thing that correlates with being a 9/11 truther is not age or race or gender or political affiliation. It is believing in at least one other conspiracy theory.
My God. God, I'm pro book burning now. It's so stupid. I guess what I find frustrating about that is it's conspiracies for me and not for thee. Because what is the definition of a conspiracy? The technical one is when two or more people work together to achieve a goal. Like, that's kind of what a conspiracy is. I do love how libs went full on conspiracy when it came to Russiagate.
Yep.
And yet they wouldn't refer themselves as conspiracy theorists because it's a pejorative term. There's a whole conspiracy theory about the term conspiracy theory, that it was deployed tactically to dismiss people providing alternative theories to the JFK assassination. So yeah, I find it very frustrating because we're limited in these terms, and even in the term truther, which didn't exist before. Again, it's kind of like the conspiracy theory term associated with 9/11. And so yeah, you just have these dismissive terms that you can throw at anybody if they present some kind of alternative to the mainstream narrative. That doesn't seem like unique to America to me in that regard, I guess.
I think this seems like a really good thesis for the episode, is actually what constitutes a conspiracy theory, and maybe it's the overall level of cynicism. But when Stephen Colbert is coming out on his talk show to talk about how Russia has a PP tape of Trump, and that's why Trump is doing Russia's bidding, and they were so eager to get him elected, no one's getting fired for believing in that or posting about that. And yet, if you post about how you think the government was involved in 9/11, you could get fired for something like that. And if we're trying to identify the difference between these two things, maybe it's the cynicism in government.
It's whether or not it is accepted in the mainstream, right? There's this expression from the world of linguistics. What's the difference between a dialect and a language? Is that a language has an army and navy, right? There's no actual identifiable difference between what makes a quote unquote language and what makes up a dialect. Yeah, what is the difference between being a 9/11 truther or being a Russiagate truther, or the verifiable conspiracies that we know the government did uncontroversially, like motherfucking MK Ultra or Iran Contra? What is the difference between that? Alex Jones, they turned the freaking frogs gay or whatever,
which
right?
he would turn out to be right about. What? Yeah, he did. Yeah. I mean, it's not as simple as that, but it was like endocrine hormone disruptors that were fucking with frogs' sexuality and reproductive cycles. So like when he says that, it's funny, right? But it's not entirely wrong either, which is...
Sorry, I'm trying to find your line, Isaac. Maybe my Alex Jones example should have been crisis actors in the mass shooting schools.
Right. Just kidding.
It might just be one of those things. It's like a conspiracy theory versus a conspiracy theory is that one of them gets you canceled and one of them doesn't.
Just to finish off this point about truthers and their nature, sometimes I got the sense watching Loose Change that this person is so cynical that they're no longer skeptical. He is so black-pilled that he just takes everything that supports his current position as fact. Oh, there's a missile on the bottom of the plane. Oh, you can see that there's an explosion in the plane. It's like, well, this isn't evidence, but you're already so convinced in the nature of man and the government that everything is going to point towards that for you. And so if I had any criticism of these people, it's that sometimes they're so cynical, they're not skeptical.
I think there is some class basis to trutherism too. Not maybe where you came from, but where you ended up. In my experience, a lot of people who I first encountered who were 9/11 truthers were kids I grew up with in Florida who didn't go to college and became like self-ed educated. So there is that rejection of the Ivy League institutional ideologies, which I have come around to. Someone who was in the ivory tower, and now I'm like, oh yeah, that's fucking annoying. But also, I think you see people retrofitting their beliefs. It really is like, who do you want the authority to be? Who is your authority? I am getting more and more vindicated as time goes on. You guys will come around too, I swear. But my mother, for instance, was very sensitive to when I would say like crazy shit. Oh, he's like, how can you believe our government would do that? How can you believe that? Rob Reiner and Soledad O'Brien have a JFK assassination podcast, which basically lays out the case that, yeah, Lee Harvey Oswald definitely didn't do it alone at the bare minimum. My mom's like, I was listening to this show and, did you know this? Did you know that? I'm like, yeah, Mom, I've been telling you that. But it was who the authority was who told her, not her own son, not enough of an authority for her. But she's come around to it. And so you do start to see this. It depends on who's saying it. And a lot of it is also, it depends on what you want to believe about the world. Dan Christensen, who is a fantastic Florida journalist, he's the one who, again, discovered the Saudi family in Sarasota that was aiding and abetting Mohammed Atta that the CIA and FBI covered up. When I would speak to him, and he continues to write about this, and it further implicates the Saudi royal government. I mean, it is like definitively Saudi. But the thing about the Saudi implication is that the more you peel back those layers, the more you're just like, it becomes a mirror, and it's the United States. But Dan Christensen, again, the guy who fucking is responsible for the case against the Saudi royal government, it's his discovery that the court case is based on. He won't go that far. And I remember asking him, I'm like, why don't you think that the United States government could have done this, considering all that you know? And he just said, I can't believe that our government would kill its own people. His personal belief blocks him from going that step further towards the actual truth. And I thought that was interesting because my belief is like, if your government is willing to kill anybody, like a foreigner, is willing to kill you too. It comes back around.
Yeah, but the pattern of the government's violence to me is that's part of the deal is we are going to do violence on your behalf to other people in other countries and minorities in our own country. But we're not going to kill finance people in our own country.
Until it becomes financially practical. And that's the thing. Yes, I used to believe, well, you'll never let a crisis go to waste. But if the logic of capitalism is the pursuit of profit, what is stopping the government from finding more profit? And if that profit means killing its own people, whether it's a finance guy or whoever else, why wouldn't they do it? There's nothing stopping them from that particular pursuit. So I've stopped looking into the details because it's as simple as to me. It's like, are they making money? Well, why wouldn't they do it if they're going to make money from it? And so it can be flexible with that. It doesn't necessarily apply to every single case. I will say, like, the Trump assassination is beyond my comprehension. Like, I literally cannot square that circle. It's almost as confusing as the Stephen Paddock Mandalay Bay shooting, which is also just like inexplicable. No one can explain it. But otherwise, yeah, I think if you just see if it's in the government's interest, and the government's interests are these corporate interests, why wouldn't they do it?
Who is the government to you here? The Carlyle Group? Or
okay, so the government is, God damn it. I think a great example of the way this kind of stuff works is it's not like the puppet master meme, right? It's not like a Jew at the top of the fucking pyramid here pulling things. You have concentric circles, or you have interests, different groups all vying for power. Just fucking gangsterism. You have the New York family and the New Jersey family, right? And they're vying for trucking routes. That's the way it operates. You just have different industries of interest. That's the government. I mean, the government has been further captured by it. It used to be that the government had its own separations of power, but what 9/11 did, it concentrated that power so significantly in the executive branch. And this is Peter Dale Scott's main theory about what the Project for the New American Century wanted to accomplish, which was, it said in its stated goal in the 90s, without the Soviet Union, we need another Pearl Harbor in order to advance American interest, American being corporate interest. And then what you have during 9/11 is the exacerbation of this term called the continuity of government, which I won't go into too much detail about that, but it's basically just the Constitution doesn't exist anymore for us. But we can do whatever we want because, and every president does this, you can look it up, every president every year signs a continuation of the Executive Act of Emergency, which is the continuity of government. So they just don't have to the gangsters getting too big and becoming a monarch, more or less. So anyway... that made any sense. But we were about to say, what are you about to say on the Saudis?
I mean, Saudi Arabia basically copped to doing 9/11 in 2018 when they had some kind of spat with Justin Trudeau, where Justin Trudeau made some comment where he was like,
They did the plane.
it sure would be nice if they treated their women and minorities better. And they released an ad showing multiple commercial jet planes crashing into the Toronto skyline. It's like, they're admitting it.
It's a pretty good joke.
Saudi Arabia's Twitter team or whatever, not a bad joke.
Yeah, the thing I'll say for historicizing it generally, if you are a centrist, if Isaac is off-putting to you, if you're like the milquetoast denialist of the truth, I want to stay in Plato's cave, man. I don't want to leave. A lot of people talk about how conspiracy theories thrive in times of trauma, rapid technological change, and low trust. And the 2000s ticks all of those boxes. Trauma with 9/11, technological change with the internet, and then how can you help but be low trust? I read that poll at the top of the episode going from 78 to 22 or whatever it was. But if you live through them lying about weapons of mass destruction, if you live through them hiding Saudi involvement, I mean, shout out to our 2000 election episode, James Baker represented the Saudis against the people suing the Saudis, right? If you see the government's actions after 9/11, how could you possibly have the trust? How could you possibly expect anything else to happen other than 9/11 trutherism? Speaking of the internet.
Yeah, let's move on to 9/11 truthers and the internet. The internet's role in this particular, if it's not a conspiracy theory, how would you characterize it? Regular, normal guy theory? Hypothesis?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. Michael Parenti had, I think it was conspiracy reality or something like that, but it was conspiracy is the logic of the ruling class.
It is a pejorative term.
Yeah, I mean, the long and the short of it is that the main change that the internet brings is some polishedness, some glossiness, and it turns conspiracy theorizing, it turns it into more active engagement, and it also lowers the barrier for entry. One of the OG conspiracy theories from the 18th century, I think it's super anti-Semitic about how the Jews made the French Revolution happen. Memoirs illustrating the history of Jacobinism ran for thousands of pages. The Warren Commission is 26 volumes. I want to say, like, unironic critical support for the theorists of past generations who had to wade through all of those thousands of pages. Because thanks to the internet, you don't need to get 26 volumes from your library. You don't need to spend weeks reading. You can watch Loose Change, which, depending on your cut, is a tight 90, right?
Also, yeah, you're right. I don't remember there being any anti-Semitic dog whistles in Loose Change.
No.
That's a good plus for that, because that's pretty hard to find these days.
Yeah, it's wild. They mentioned that there's gold bullion in the base of the building. Thousands of tons of it. It's but never touched on anti-Semitism.
That's only in the first cut. They claim that they dropped Tower 7 because they put a dollar amount of gold bullion under Tower 7, and they dropped the building to do essentially like the heist from Die Hard 3. And someone crunched the numbers, and they're like, yeah, that would be thousands of trucks of bullion. So they just cut it from one of the later iterations, which rocks. But yeah, this give and take of the internet era conspiracy, right? When you think of an internet conspiracy theorist, what do they love to say? Do your own research. If you publish your own JFK book, you would never tell your readers to do their own research. But thanks to the internet, you can turn it into this much more active and, dare I say, collaborative activity.
Yeah, it's interesting to see how that's progressed even since then, right? Like Web 2.0 has developed since the mid 2000s. Although, I'm sure there was a decent amount of 9/11 conspiracy theorying going on,
GeoCities or something.
On chat rooms. But with QAnon, you truly have an even more collaborative process of like people.
Did you say TrueAnon or QAnon?
Sorry, QAnon.
Yeah, they won't return my phone call, so it's not collaborative. Yeah, I think that the internet. Fuck, I just went blank.
Let the worm speak.
Yeah. I think that the internet has made conspiracies just more entertaining. And I will say, I do think, to rewind a slight bit, I do think that the vast majority of conspiracy theorists are men. I do think it skews heavily boys. Because women love true crime. That's their jam. That's what they listen to. Conspiracy theories are our true crime. It is our infotainment. The same way, I don't think listening to true crime stuff makes you change your behavior at all. Really, it just makes you more paranoid. But it's fun for them to listen to. I listen to conspiracy theories, but what the fuck am I doing about it? You know, like.
So are you saying that women have the same interest, but what they're looking at is much more parochial?
Listen, I forgot which episode I did where I said something that got me in trouble. It's going to happen every time, every episode. I'm going to say something, some kind of racist, misogynist.
Yeah, you're right. You never hear a woman going off about the Carlisle group.
Yeah.
On my list, the only two women were Rosie O'Donnell and Joy Reid.
Well, Rosie O'Donnell, that's the exception that proves the rule.
Yeah, and speaking of the internet, and listen, I'm sorry I'm such a centrist. I'm so wishy-washy on the conspiracies, but one of the things that made me start to come around to Isaac's viewpoint, I was Googling prominent 9/11 truthers to try and compile my little list. And these were the 4 results. First result, Council on Foreign Relations website, quote, 7 resources for debunking 9/11 conspiracy theories. Second result, Wikipedia 9/11 truth movement. Third result, the 9/11 Commission report. Fourth result, Amazon.com, debunking 9/11 myths. Big tech is in on it, okay? The conspiracy goes all the way up to the top.
And remember, Loose Change was released on YouTube before it was acquired by Google.
Yep.
So maybe there's something there. Conspiracies abound.
And actually, that's a great segue into our echoes in the culture. Speaking of how it was hard researching this episode for a normie like me, the first big echo that we have is just canceling. And I absolutely do not want to go into like some kind of philosophical debate about free speech and what can and can't be said and where and when. This is the same caveat I gave on our Epic Bacon Reddit episode. I find that shit annoying. All I will say is that you genuinely cannot believe this in polite society. Charles Krauthammer, rot in piss, said back in the day that 9/11 truthers, quote, derangedly desecrate the memory of 9/11 victims. And I would point out that the truthers probably see Charles Krauthammer, one of the loudest op-ed voices in favor of the Iraq war, as doing far, far more to derangedly desecrate the memory of 9/11 victims. In fact, I won't even speak for the truthers. I think Charles Krauthammer derangedly desecrated the victims of 9/11 with his constant warmongering. But other examples would be Spike Lee, forced to re-edit his 9/11 retrospective documentary on HBO because people said he couldn't platform or spotlight the truther movement. Alex Jones has basically been kicked off the internet. So you cannot believe these things. But at the same time, the government is allowed to stop the survivors from getting medical care. And the government will run interference for Saudi Arabia when 9/11 victims try to sue them to learn how and what and when they knew what they knew, right?
And the government will reach a plea deal with Khalid Sheikh Mohammed so that he doesn't have to go to court, so that he doesn't have to talk more about what actually happened.
Yeah, so he doesn't have to testify.
I think it's changing. The culture is changing, and I've been saying this, is that 9/11's boring now. 9/11's normie now. Nick Mullen does a bit about how, like, your grandma's like, yeah, Bush did 9/11 or whatever. Tucker Carlson, who in the aughts, before he got that, he's getting a big double chin going, he was railing against anyone who would dare challenge the 9/11 mainstream narrative. Now he's pushing JFK shit, 9/11, and he's never apologized once for doing that or being responsible for the death of Gary Webb. But I think that the culture is changing, and I think it just takes a little bit of distance, and it becomes kind of a joke at this point. It used to be edgy to post 9/11 memes. You sent me that one meme, and I was like, yeah, man, that is played out. the spaghetti towers. The spaghetti towers. It's saturated now. It's no longer cool. It's not on the edge anymore. I think it has become normied. And the consequence of that is I think that it has made it less significant. Even if we all agree that 9/11 was an inside job, so fucking what? What would happen if everyone agreed? Nothing. Nothing would change. Nothing would happen. So that's where I've become very cynical about conspiracy theories themselves, is that they're true, yeah. All conspiracies are true, in my opinion, at least metaphorically.
In the 1970s, after whatever broke, MK Ultra, you had like the church commissions, right? You don't think there would be a modern day equivalent? You don't think there'd be some kind of outcry to rein in intelligence agencies who were responsible for it?
I think that you can see this with the Trump assassination right now, is that it is so polarized that you do have Republicans trying to dig out some conspiracies. They just had the head of Secret Service resign. But I do think that you do have them now. I mean, you do. You had the investigation of Russia and Donald Trump, which turned out to be an actual pejorative conspiracy theory, not true at all. So I don't know anymore. I don't know if you'll ever get to that extent. Yeah, the church committee was quite good at the time, but that's really a question. The issue is, if Cheney and Bush die before ever having to give testimony under oath about what happened that day, it doesn't matter. I think that conspiracy theories today are so obfuscated. There will never be a smoking gun. It'll never be satisfying. And even if we do get to the truth, it will be revised a decade later somehow.
I think that's a perfect dovetail into another echo in the culture is I do think we are starting to see more and more 9/11 jokes and memes. And I think that those 9/11 jokes and memes are intimately tied up with the fact that nothing ever happens, as you're saying. Nothing ever happens. Nothing will ever happen. 9/11 jokes can be explained away like, yes, okay, there have always been edgelords who would post edgy jokes. Sure. We also have younger people who didn't actually live through it, so maybe they're more comfortable joking about it. Sure. Also, if you see the government use 9/11 as a carte blanche for a forever war, they use it as something you cannot question ever. You cannot be a truther. You can't question the actual conspiracy that happened, which was the link between Al-Qaeda and Saddam Hussein and weapons of mass destruction. All the while that they're doing this, saying you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't think this, you can't say that, they're incredibly buddy-buddy with the country that's most responsible for doing it, Saudi Arabia, and they're telling you that you can't joke about it. I think that breaks people's minds, and they're like, no, fuck that. I will joke about the day that 3,000 people died. Who are you to tell me that I can't? You who killed 1 million Iraqis.
The Van Jones one, I think, was the most disheartening. He's a journalist, and he signed a petition saying that we should look into something. And it's like he got fired for that, or at least had his feet held to the fire. And it's like, shouldn't journalists be looking into things? Isn't that what they're meant to do? I don't even know that he had a thesis. If he was saying like, oh, wow, someone should look into it.
I think if there's another echo in the culture, and maybe this is both cynical, but also maybe hopeful, is the thing that happened, which is the equivalent to 20 9/11s or 15 9/11s, they said, right? Which is October 7th.
No.
One of the things that maybe has changed, because as 9/11 was happening, I don't think that there were prolific alternative theories to what was being presented to us. But the October 7th attack, which has a lot of incredible parallels to our 9/11, is very interesting because we get to see it in real time. There's a lot of debunking happening in real time. It's a serious fucking red line. That's the red line right now, is Palestine. You cannot fuck around with that as a journalist or as a lot of things.
I mean, we're recording it the day after Cori Bush lost her primary to 10 million AIPAC dollars, right? That's 2 members of the squad. AIPAC said they're spending $100 million just on these primary election cycles, right?
You also get to kind of debunk things in real time, which I don't think you got to do in the aughts as easily. Like I mentioned before with the Jeffrey Gettleman stuff, that story of the Hamas systemic rape fell apart very quickly. And that was thanks to alternative media that still thankfully exists, but also just the information that is spread through the internet. So I do think that some things have changed. Some things do remain the same. Becoming conspiratorial, I guess I hear it less now. I don't hear truther as frequently. What kind of is? There's a January 6er. I've heard that. But other I don't even know.
Do an honor. The Jeffrey Epstein one was interesting because it's the first one where that went from the pejorative conspiracy to a mainstream belief. And then also the disillusionment of being like, okay, so everybody agrees that he was this pedophile with the world elite, and we know who was on the plane, but we're not going to look into this at all.
The fact that Bill Clinton still gets to trot around, it's crazy.
Yeah, dude, the fact that he will be giving a speech at the Democratic National Convention in 2 weeks' time.
Oh, man.
I don't know if it's necessarily a good thing, but you hear conspiracy theorists use less as a pejorative because everybody's got at least one now.
Yeah.
If you're a right-wing psycho, maybe you're a QAnon guy, maybe you think they stole the 2020 election.
Michelle's a man,
birtherism. If you're a lib, you get Russiagate. We get boutique conspiracy theories now. Pick your motherfucking...
They're fun. I will say they're very fun. There's a lot of really great ones out there.
Our final echo in the culture here is we're dealing with Web 2.0. And as Giordano explained to me, Web 2.0 is the idea of user-generated content. That's a term I learned just 2 weeks ago. We had the idea that QAnon is kind of the OG Web 2.0 conspiracy theory, because not only do you have the drops but you also have the analysis of the drops, right? And I started but never finished reading a book on QAnon called We Are the Storm, which was awesome. Or no, sorry, The Storm is Already Here, The Storm, something of that nature, something that had to do with the storm. But they point out that the QAnon movement would have superstars who were the best at interpreting the drops. They're essentially like the Talmudic rabbis of the documents. And I had a great idea. I don't even know if I should give it on the show because someone might Zuckerberg me out of this idea, but you should compile all of the QAnon drops in a book, but publish it, much like the Talmud, how they have the text and then the Rashi commentary on the side. You should have the interpretive blog posts on the border around the drop and publish it like a scriptural text, like a QAnon Talmud. It would sell, man. And I think it would all be public domain, but conspiracies are growing at a rapid clip. That's why it's less and less of a slur. And yeah, as we were just saying, in the age of the internet, we can get one for you. What am I going to have to say today to get you into a nice conspiracy theory?
Just like our media has fragmented, our conspiracy theories have too. It used to be that there were only 3 conspiracy theories, right?
Yeah.
You had Kennedy, UFOs, of course, and something about money, I'm sure.
Kennedy, UFOs, and Jews.
Yeah.
But then in the 2000s, we got this proliferation of everything, right? Media, cable networks, and conspiracy theories. Now, you can believe in some theory that really speaks to you personally.
Isaac's so mad at me.
Well, it's just like, just stop associating flat earth with grassy knoll. That's like the shit coding, that's how they get you to associate the two things, even though they have nothing to do with each other.
Well, thanks so much. I mean, you really saved this episode from being extremely normie-ish. Like having your brother come in who's back from military school.
Or who sells you weed.
Who sells you weed. And is like, yeah, the government did that shit, right? The Columbia disaster, cui bono. That's all I'm saying.
I think my closing thoughts on 2000s, 9/11 conspiracy theory media. The most frustrating thing for me that is both of the time and continues is none of these conspiracy theories that we watched mentioned. The word blowback is not mentioned. And you can listen to Blowback if you want to hear more about that. But I read a book years ago called Inside the Kingdom. It was written by a Brit who spent a lot of time living in Saudi Arabia. And I think Americans know about the Charlie Wilson's War era, but it is brain melting to wrap your head around how much money and guns went to Afghanistan throughout the 80s. It is measured in the tens of billions of dollars at least. That's assuming the CIA didn't have some off the books money that went over there. Yeah, probably the hundreds of billions. The weaponry that went over there is measured in the tons, if not hundreds or dozens of tons. And the claim in this Inside the Kingdom book that it advanced, and I say the name of the book because I couldn't get an independent fact check on the internet for this, but when you look at the whole Cold War and you look at each country in the world, how much money did they spend in the fight against communism? The number one, USA, baby, number one, of course. The number 2 country is Saudi Arabia. Because Saudi Arabia agreed to match dollar for dollar what other people were sending into Afghanistan.
Band for band. We can go band for band on fighting communism.
And they don't just export money and guns. They export Wahhabism, famously. America made its own demons to fight. I'm finding myself, as I did the last couple Isaac episodes, getting discouraged towards the end of the thing in terms of like, do you think the U.S. relationship with Saudi Arabia is ever going to change? Sound off, team Nothing Ever Changes gang in the comments.
It's already changed. A great canary in the coal mine to see the degree to which it changes is the degree to which the United States government allows these cases against the Saudi royal government to go through. Mohammed bin Salman already didn't sign that agreement to trade in exclusively U.S. dollars anymore. So now all other kinds of petrodollars can flood in, which is really what's made the United States so powerful for all this time, was that exclusive relationship with Saudi Arabia. It is weird that this country that is our fucking homies for most of the 20th century would attack us. And that's what peeling back these layers start to do. Again, you like, the more you go, the more it turns into a mirror and you're like, it's us, it's us, it's us. So I don't know. I am, in spite of all this shit, and bringing up my mother again, she's like, how do you think about all these things or look into these things and stay like positive and optimistic about the world? I don't fucking know, but I am. I am. The world's going to change the way it's going to change. And I have a policy of eyes open. It's better to know and try and find some weirdness in it than it is to think to close your eyes and pretend like everything's okay.
You bring it back to the media of Farhenheit 9/11 and loose change, because I mean, that is how we started. This evolution in format in the 2000s from Michael Moore's Farhenheit 9/11, this big budget documentary that got a standing ovation at cons, to a YouTube documentary, right? We're seeing the past do a relay with the present, because for the most part, if you're going to watch a scene video, it probably will not be a
big budget.
Yeah, it'll be a video like on YouTube or something. By looking at these two, it gives us a really good sense for the shift that is going to take place from the 2000s to where we're at currently. From 60 minutes to YouTube. And one of the perfect points to capture what I'm talking about here is that Michael Moore did release a sequel to this movie, Farhenheit 11/9, about the Trump election in 2018, and it grossed $6.7 million worldwide. One of the lowest totals of his career. So you can really see this shift in how we consume documentaries. Isaac, would you like to plug anything?
Yeah, give me money. I need money. It's hard making a buck as a truth teller. Yeah, check me out over at Coexist Inc. Follow me on Instagram at gluten_daddy. If you want to yell at me, I'll talk to you. Literally, just DM me and we'll fight. I'll do it. If you disagree with anything I've said. But yeah, as always, a pleasure.
Yeah, dude, thank you so much. I'm sorry we put you through our longest episodes. Especially since like you come in filled with your fucking piss and vinegar to drop truth bombs, and I'm here like, conspiracy theories thrive in times of trauma.
Hey, you know, if I can convince you that the CIA got the black community addicted to crack,
I'm there on that one.
Then you are one. So you're already there.
Yeah.
Why is that so hard to believe?
We know they imported the drugs.
I was about to joke that Isaac is going to come on again for The Bourne Identity, something simple, but then I remember that is a movie about the CIA, it's
MK Ultra.
Yeah, doing Black Ops.
Yeah.
Maybe not that one. Yeah.
Juana Man. Oh man, I would so do Juana Man. We can talk about trans women in sports.
No. Absolutely fucking not.
Dude.
What is Juana Man?
Oh, you haven't. Oh, it's a 2000 basketball movie about a basketball player who gets kicked out of the league for being an asshole. So he starts dressing like a woman and takes over the women's basketball league.
Okay. Is this the Ben Shapiro movie? It's the same
that's
plot
Lady
line.
Ballers. It is. They stole, but Juana Man rocks. It's a great movie, very fun, and I was a sports journalist. I'm not transphobic, so it'd be a good episode. I think that'd be really fun.
Okay, I'm looking at the other episodes we have on the docket right now. We have 2.5 Men. I've always wanted to do an episode on that.
Never seen an episode of that.
Vetoed. So, close to the show, as always, please like, please subscribe, please click the fucking bell or whatever the shit. Do all that stuff.
Please clap.
Yeah, we need to compel people to leave a review. So let me think of like maybe a Michael Moore thing that we could be like. What's like a shenanigan that he could do to get our, like, he's always got his little pranks. What's like a prank he could do to get our listeners? It's only 2 or 3 taps, but most people won't do it.
Listen, if you leave us a review, I promise it will stop the next 9/11. That is not a threat.
Yeah, it makes us feel good, and also it helps the show get discovered.
And it's free. You've been doing this for free. The least a motherfucker can do is like and leave a review. Same for me too. Don't take me out.
I think I counted the number of taps. It's either 2 or 3 taps.
Please clap. Please clap.
Okay, cool. Thank you again to Isaac. Please check out Coexist Inc., a podcast that I love. And yeah, we give our strongest soldiers our toughest battles. And he certainly is one of them. So big thank you to him.
Aw.
Ben and I have been on his pod a couple times, and we're gonna go back again. So if you want a good episode to get into it, check out our fucking Jon Stewart or Jerry Seinfeld Unfrosted episode, which is very good.
Yeah, the Jerry Seinfeld episode is great. That was a lot of fun.
I met a stranger on the street. The stranger to me, but they're like they're like, oh yeah, I loved the Jerry Seinfeld episode.
Hell yeah!
Like, oh wow, cool.
That was also a 2-hour one. We wanted to repay in kind Isaac for all his time. So please bring us on for a long one. All right, ciao, ciao. Bye.
Later.